The rain in North City always tasted like copper and ozone before it hit your tongue. I remembered that taste with a terrifying, crystal clarity because it was the very last thing I swallowed before my spine shattered against the asphalt. 3 years into a future I never should have seen, the wind had been screaming a wild, jagged song. I was cornered on the rooftop of an abandoned textile warehouse on the industrial outskirts of the city. My beige wool coat was torn at the shoulder, my phone lay cracked and useless in a puddle 3 feet away, and my fingers were completely numb from the freezing downpour. Through the curtain of rain, I had looked up at the man standing near the ledge. Or rather, the silhouette of a man. He possessed that exact, unyielding posture, broad shoulders, a tall, imposing frame that seemed to absorb the light around him, and he held a signature black silk umbrella with a polished silver handle. A luxury item in a graveyard of concrete. He didn't say a word. He just stood there in the shadows, an untouchable god watching a peasant meet her end. 2 burly men in heavy jackets, their faces obscured by the dark, stepped forward. One of them had grinned, a flash of yellow teeth in the night. "A clean break, Mrs. Gu," he had mocked, his voice cutting through the thunder. "The boss prefers things neat." Then came the weightlessness. The sickening lurch of my stomach as my feet lost contact with the ledge. The rush of freezing air tearing at my hair. And finally, the agonizing, bone-snapping stop that silenced everything. Ah! I bolted upright, a strangled gasp tearing from my throat. My fingers clawed frantically at the sheets beneath me, my chest heaving as if I were still trying to breathe underwater. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird, each thud loud and echoing in my ears. "Breathe, Qingran. Breathe," I choked out, my hands flying to my neck, then down to my ribs, my waist, my thighs. No blood. No shattered bone fragments pushing through my skin. No freezing rain. Instead of the scent of wet rust and wet concrete, my nose was filled with the delicate, impossibly expensive fragrance of aged sandalwood and freshly laundered high-thread count cotton. Sunlight, bright, blinding, and golden, was pouring through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of a room I knew all too well. I scrambled out of the bed, my legs tangling in the silk sheets, and practically fell onto the plush Persian rug. On the mahogany nightstand sat a sleek digital clock. The glowing red numbers read, June 9th. My breath hitched. I rushed over to the grand vanity mirror, gripping the edges of the marble counter so hard my knuckles turned white. The face looking back at her was pale, her eyes wide with a frantic, animalistic panic, but her skin was flawless. There were no bruises from the thugs who had pinned her down, no hollow, sunken cheeks from the months of absolute poverty and isolation that had followed the divorce. I picked up the smartphone resting by the sink and checked the calendar setting. My heart stopped, then restarted at double its speed. It was 3 years ago. I was back. I was back in the master bedroom of the Gu family villa. Specifically, I had been flung backward in time to a date exactly 6 months before Gu Yanzhou would coldly hand me the divorce papers that initiated my downward spiral into ruin and, ultimately, my execution. 6 months, I whispered, my knees finally giving out entirely. I slid down the cold marble of the vanity, burying my face in my hands. I have exactly 6 months to get out before he kills me. In my past life, I had been the quintessential, pathetic, self-sacrificing fool. I had loved Gu Yanzhou to the point of absolute self-destruction. When he handed me those papers, I had cried. I had begged on my knees. I had clung to the hem of his perfectly tailored trousers, asking what I had done wrong, promising I would change, that I would be quieter, more submissive, anything just to stay by his side. My desperation had only made his cold eyes turn even more dismissive, even more disgusted. This time? This time, I wouldn't fight him for a single second. The moment he brought out those papers, I would sign them so fast the pen would smoke. But until then, I had to be a ghost. Gu Yanzhou was the ruthless, calculating apex predator of the corporate world. If he sensed even a flicker of rebellion or suspected I was trying to move assets behind his back, he might accelerate his timeline. He might decide that a quiet divorce was too messy and opt for the permanent solution early. I had to play the part of the perfect, meek, invisible wife just long enough to build a small, untraceable nest egg and vanish into the countryside. Click. The sound of the heavy brass door handle turning sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. My entire body went rigid. Every muscle locked into a defensive, terrified coil. I scrambled up from the floor, smoothing down my silk nightgown with trembling hands, forcing my face into the blank, compliant expression I had spent years perfecting. Gu Yanzhou walked in. He looked exactly as he did in my nightmares. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a charcoal gray 3-piece suit that didn't have a single crease. His jawline was sharp, his dark hair perfectly styled, and his eyes, well, his eyes were usually 2 pieces of obsidian ice. Except right now, they weren't. The moment Yanzhou's gaze locked onto me standing by the vanity, his expensive leather briefcase slipped from his fingers. It hit the thick carpet with a heavy, dull thud. Every ounce of color drained from his face, leaving him a stark, ghostly pale. For a terrible, agonizing second, the man who held the economic strings of the entire region looked like he was staring at a corpse. Qingran. The voice that left his lips was a ragged, choked whisper. It sounded broken. Raw. My stomach plummeted. Why is he looking at me like that? A voice screamed inside my head. Does he know? Did someone tell him I looked at a secret bank account yesterday? Is he going to kill me right now? Before I could even think of a path to the door, Yanzhou crossed the room. He didn't walk, he moved with a desperate, terrifying speed, closing the distance between us in 3 massive strides. Before I could flinch away, his long arms wrapped around my waist, pulling me flush against his chest with such violent force that all the air was instantly expelled from my lungs. He buried his face deep into the crook of my neck. I could feel his entire body, this massive, powerful man, shaking like a leaf in a storm. You're here, he breathed against my skin, his voice thick, suffocating with an intense emotion I had never heard from him in a lifetime. You're warm. You're alive. Oh God, you're alive. I stood entirely frozen, my arms pinned tightly against my sides. My mind was a chaotic storm of pure panic. What kind of psychological torture is this? In our past life, Yanzhou loathed physical intimacy with me. He slept on his side of the bed, never crossed the imaginary line dividing us, and our martial relations were rare, quiet, and felt entirely transactional. This desperate, bone-crushing embrace felt like a calculated trap designed to disorient me. Is he testing my reaction? I thought frantically, my heart hammering against his chest. Did his toxic family tell him I was acting distant? Is he trying to make me drop my guard so I sign away my basic legal rights? Why Yanzhou, I stammered, forcing my voice to sound small, weak, and appropriately frightened, the submissive wife he was used to. You're compressing my ribs. It hurts to breathe. The moment the word hurts left my mouth, Yanzhou recoiled as if he had touched a live wire. He let go of me instantly, stumbling back a half step. His hands hovered in the midair between us, twitching, completely unsure of where to go. He looked down at me, his dark eyes frantically scanning my face, my neck, my hands, as if searching for injuries that didn't exist. I'm sorry, he said hurriedly, his breathing shallow and erratic. I'm so sorry, Qingran. I didn't mean to hurt you. I had a nightmare. A terrible, horrific nightmare. A nightmare? I thought, keeping my eyes wide and entirely innocent while my internal alarm bells went off. The great Gu Yanzhou doesn't have nightmares. He is the nightmare. It's quite all right, I said softly, lowering my gaze to the floor to ensure he couldn't see the sheer, unadulterated terror swimming in my pupils. You should change. You'll be late for the office. I'll go down to the kitchen and tell the chef to prepare your breakfast. Your usual black coffee and egg whites? No. Yanzhou reached out and caught my wrist. I choked back a scream, my muscles tensing for a blow. But the moment he felt me flinch, his grip loosened entirely. He didn't let go, but his fingers merely rested against my skin, light as a feather, trembling slightly. Don't go down, he said, his voice dropping to a gentle, pleading register that sounded completely wrong coming from him. You don't have to do that anymore. Let's eat together. I'll cook breakfast today. My jaw almost unhinged itself. Gu Yanzhou? Cooking? The man who, in our 4 years of knowing each other, probably thought the kitchen was a decorative room meant solely for the servants? The man who once asked me if the salt shaker needed batteries because it wasn't pouring fast enough? There's no need to joke, Yanzhou, I said, forcing a fragile, practiced little laugh from my throat. Go change. I'll wait downstairs. I pulled my wrist out of his slack grip and practically sprinted out of the room, my slippers slapping against the hardwood hallway as I fled from whatever bizarre game he was playing. The next 3 months of my reborn life could only be described as a psychological thriller masquerading as a romance novel. I was doing my absolute best to plan a quiet, bloodless exit from the Gu Empire, but Gu Yanzhou was making it incredibly difficult by acting like a completely deranged, overly attentive stalker. It started with the flowers. On a Tuesday morning, exactly 2 weeks after my rebirth, I walked into my private dressing room to find a massive, overflowing vase of fresh morning glories resting on the vanity table. They were beautiful, deep blues and soft purples, dusted with morning dew. I froze at the doorway. Morning glories were my favorite flower. It was a stupid, trivial detail I had mentioned to him exactly once, 4 years ago, during our disastrous first anniversary dinner where he spent the entire night answering corporate emails on his phone. I had pointed to a floral arrangement on the restaurant wall and muttered, I like those. They only bloom when the sun is rising. He hadn't even looked up from his screen. Auntie Zhou. I called out, my voice tight. The elderly housekeeper hurried into the room, wiping her hands on her apron. Yes, madam? Is something wrong with the room? Where did these come from? I pointed at the vase as if it contained a live grenade. Did the delivery driver make a mistake? These are supposed to go to the main hall, or perhaps to the office? Auntie Zhou beamed, her wrinkles crinkling with genuine delight. Oh, no mistake at all, madam. The master ordered them fresh. He gave strict instructions to the floral supplier that they must be delivered to the villa before 7 a.m. every single day. He even handled the delivery person himself this morning before he left for the office. He seems so changed, doesn't he? So attentive, so loving. A cold sweat broke out across my shoulder blades. Attentive? Loving? No. This is a behavioral baseline test, my inner survival guide screamed. He's tracking my personal preferences. He's building a psychological profile to see if my tastes have changed, which would indicate I'm hiding something or planning an escape. The villain is collecting data. I see, I managed to say, offering Auntie Zhou a stiff smile. How thoughtful. The next day, the tactical psychological warfare moved to the dining room. In our past life, dinner was a silent affair. Yanzhou would read the Financial Times on his tablet, I would quietly chew my food, and the only sound would be the clinking of silverware. But lately, dinner had become an absolute circus of forced affection. I sat at the long mahogany table, carefully cutting into a small portion of steamed fish. Across from me, Yanzhou was completely ignoring his own prime rib steak. Instead, he had a large plate of king prawns in front of him. He was meticulously, carefully peeling them one by one. His large, powerful hands that signed multi-billion-dollar mergers, were carefully removing the shells, dipping the meat into a light garlic sauce, and then, with an incredibly soft, almost pathetic look in his eyes, placing them directly into my bowl. He looked like a massive golden retriever begging for a scrap of validation. Eat more, Qingran, he said, his voice terrifyingly gentle. You're too thin. Your wrists look like they could snap. If you don't like the chef's cooking, just tell me. I can hire a Michelin-starred team from France by tomorrow morning. Or, I can try making that braised pork you liked during our college years. I've been reading recipes. I stared down at the mountain of perfectly peeled prawns accumulating in my bowl. My stomach churned with an intense wave of anxiety. He's trying to poison me, my traumatized mind concluded instantly. No, wait, poison is too messy for court. He's trying to make me gain weight so I become sluggish and can't run away. Or he's trying to overwhelm me with luxury so I let my guard down and sign a bad postnuptial agreement that strips me of my personal savings. Thank you, Yanzhou, I whispered, my hand shaking slightly as I picked up a prawn with my chopsticks. I took a microscopic bite, watching his face intently for any sign of a malicious smirk, a twitch of guilt, or the classic villainous gleam. Yanzhou didn't smirk. Instead, a look of profound, almost agonizing relief washed over his sharp features. A soft, genuine smile tugged at the corners of his lips, making him look so breathtakingly handsome it was almost unfair. He's getting better at acting, I noted grimly in my mental survival log, chewing the prawn as if it were glass. The antagonist is evolving. He has mastered the facial expressions of a loving spouse. I must remain vigilant. Do you like it? He asked, his eyes practically shining. Is the sauce too salty? It's perfect, I said, forcing the food down my throat. Really? To cope with the sheer stress of living with a husband who had suddenly transformed from a cold CEO into an overly aggressive homemaker, I started taking solace in small things. If I was going to die or be ruined in 6 months, I was at least going to enjoy my mornings. One Saturday, while Yanzhou was supposedly at a morning board meeting, I decided to bake. Baking was my secret passion, something I had abandoned in my past life because the Gu family deemed it unbefitting of a high society matriarch. I tied my hair back in a messy bun, threw on an old apron that had slipped past the housekeeper's radar, and covered the entire kitchen island in flour. I was in the middle of aggressively kneading dough for cinnamon rolls, humming a cheerful tune, when the kitchen door swung open. I froze, a clump of dough raised in my hand like a weapon. Yanzhou stood there. He wasn't in his suit. He was wearing a casual black cashmere sweater with the sleeves pushed up to his elbows. And he was staring at me. Oh no, I thought, internal panic rising. He catches me doing something undignified. Now comes the lecture about the Gu family reputation. What are you doing? He asked, his voice low. I am baking. I said defensively, lifting my chin. If the mess bothers you, I will clean it up immediately. I know it's not proper. Can I help? I blinked. What? Before I could protest, Yanzhou walked over to the island. He looked completely out of place among the bags of sugar and rolling pins, like a dark prince trapped in a bakery. He looked down at the flour, then at the dough, and then, without warning, plunged his large, manicured hand straight into the flour bin. A massive cloud of white powder erupted into the air, poofing directly into his face. Yanzhou froze. His dark hair, his eyelashes, and his nose were completely coated in white flour. He looked like an expensive marble statue that had been poorly dusted. I bit my lip so hard I thought it would bleed. A bubble of laughter rose in my throat, completely involuntary. The terrifying, cold-blooded killer of my past life currently looked like a confused baker's apprentice who had lost a fight with a windmill. You're supposed to put the flour on the counter, Yanzhou, not wear it, I giggled, the sound slipping out before I could stop myself. Yanzhou looked at me, and for a moment, the heavy, intense sorrow that usually lingered in his eyes vanished. A genuine, boyish grin broke through the white powder on his face. I see. The instructions in the business manuals are less airborne. He reached out to wipe his brow, only to smear wet dough across his forehead. I laughed out loud then, a real, bright sound that echoed through the high ceilings of the kitchen. For a brief, shining moment, the terror melted away, replaced by the absurdity of the corporate titan covered in baking ingredients. But the moment he took a step closer to me, his eyes softening as he looked at my laughing face, the ghost of the rainy roof rushed back into my mind. My laughter died instantly. I stepped back, my smile vanishing as quickly as it had arrived. I'll finish this myself, I whispered, my voice going cold. You should wash up. The light in his eyes dimmed instantly, dropping back into that familiar, heartbreaking shadow. Right, he muttered, stepping away. Of course. The fragile peace we had established over flour and prawns completely shattered when the invitation to the annual Gu family banquet arrived. In my past life, this specific banquet was the official beginning of my nightmare. It was the event where Yanzhou's toxic aunt and his arrogant cousin, Gu Ruabai, had publicly humiliated me in front of the entire high society of North City. They had mocked my background, called me a penniless social climber who had entrapped Yanzhou, and insinuated that I was nothing more than a temporary fixture in the house. And Yanzhou? In the past life, he had stood by the bar, swirling his whiskey, completely silent and stoic. He had ignored my pleading, tearful glances because he believed that words couldn't hurt a person of substance. His silence had given his family the green light to treat me like garbage, which eventually led to my isolation after the divorce. This time, I was prepared. I chose a simple, entirely unpretentious beige silk dress. It didn't scream wealth, it didn't seek attention, it was the dress of an invisible woman. I wanted to fade into the wallpaper, endure the insults, and count down the days until my escape. The grand ballroom of the Phoenix Hotel was a sea of glittering diamonds, champagne towers, and fake smiles. The moment Yanzhou and I walked through the double doors, a hush fell over the immediate crowd. Yanzhou immediately placed his large hand firmly on the small of my back. I flinched slightly at the contact, my skin prickling with anxiety. Why is he holding me so tightly? Is he trying to ensure I don't run away before his family delivers the blow? Stay close to me, Qingran, he murmured near my ear, his breath warm against my skin. Don't leave my side tonight. Not even for a minute. Ah, I thought grimly. He wants a front row seat to the humiliation. He's making sure the target stays in the bullseye. We hadn't even reached the champagne station when a familiar, oily voice cut through the soft classical music. Ah, cousin-in-law. What a surprise to see you here. Gu Ruabai walked toward us, a smirk plastered across his face, a crystal glass of champagne held loosely in his hand. He was Yanzhou's cousin, a man who held a high-ranking position in the subsidiary company solely because of his bloodline. The moment his face entered my field of vision, my breath caught in my throat. My ears filled with a sudden, deafening roaring sound, the sound of the wind on that abandoned warehouse roof. My knees went weak. This was the voice. This was the exact voice that had mocked me in the dark before I fell. Ruabai stopped a few feet away, his eyes scanning my beige dress with blatant, mocking amusement. Still wearing such cheap, dull colors, Qingran? I would think that as the mistress of the Gu villa, you could afford to dress in something less ordinary. But I suppose you can't take the countryside out of the girl. You look like a maid who accidentally wandered into the ballroom. The familiar insult stung, but the sheer terror of his presence was what made my hands clench into tight fists. I took an instinctive step backward, trying to put space between myself and the man who would eventually order my death. Before Ruabai could utter another malicious syllable, a heavy, suffocatingly dark presence stepped directly in front of me. Gu Yanzhou shifted his position, his massive frame completely blocking Ruabai from my line of sight. It was like an eclipse. The air in the immediate area seemed to drop by 10 degrees. Yanzhou's aura, usually controlled and calculating, erupted into a murderous, freezing rage that sent an immediate shockwave through the nearby guests. He stared down at his cousin, his eyes entirely black, devoid of a single speck of warmth. "Gu Ruabai," Yanzhou said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, low register that sounded like a predator growling in the dark. "If I hear your voice directed at my wife again, if you so much as breathe in her direction with that mouth, I will have your father's subsidiary liquidated by midnight tonight. Every asset frozen. Every contract voided." Ruabai's smirk instantly vanished. He took a panicked step back, his champagne glass rattling against his ring. "Why, Yanzhou, what are you saying? It was just a joke. We always joke like this." And then, Yanzhou continued, stepping forward, his voice a lethal whisper that made my blood run cold, "I will personally ensure you are stripped of your name and kicked out of the city. Try me, Ruabai. See if you survive the night." The entire section of the ballroom went dead silent. Guests lowered their glasses, staring in absolute shock. Never in the history of the Gu family had Gu Yanzhou publicly attacked his own blood relative, let alone over his quiet, invisible wife. Ruabai paled to the color of chalk. He swallowed hard, muttered a hasty, terrified apology, and scrambled away into the crowd like a rat fleeing a sinking ship. Yanzhou didn't care about the staring crowd. The very millisecond Ruabai was gone, he turned around to face me. The terrifying, murderous demon vanished, replaced instantly by an anxious, profoundly worried husband. He reached out, his hands trembling slightly as he went to touch my shoulders. "Qingran, are you okay? Did he hurt you? Did his words upset you? Tell me, and I'll have the security team bar the entire family from the venue right now. Don't touch me." The outburst ripped from my throat before my conscious mind could stop it. Several nearby socialites gasped, whispering behind their fans. My eyes were wide, dilated with absolute, raw panic. To the rest of the world, Yanzhou had just performed a chivalrous act of protection. But to me, a woman who knew his true nature, this display of dominance was the most terrifying thing I had ever witnessed. He had just demonstrated how easily, how ruthlessly he could destroy a human being with a single sentence. He had shown his absolute power. If he can destroy his own cousin over a petty comment, my traumatized brain reasoned, what will he do to me when I try to hand him the divorce papers? He will crush me into dust. Yanzhou's hands froze midair. The rejection seemed to hit him like a physical blow to the chest. He flinched, his jaw tightening as a flash of profound, agonizing sorrow passed through his dark eyes. Slowly, painfully, he pulled his hands back to his sides. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice cracking slightly. I only wanted to protect you." "I want to go home," I said, my voice shaking so violently I could barely form the words. I refused to look at his face. "Please. I want to go home right now." "Okay," he replied softly, his head bowing as if he were a servant being dismissed. "We'll go home." During the entire 40-minute car ride back to the villa, the silence inside the luxury vehicle was heavy enough to suffocate a person. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass of the window, watching the dark clouds gather above North City. The first drops of rain were beginning to pattern against the glass. I looked at the digital clock on the dashboard. 3 months had passed. 3 months of flowers, prawns, flour, and terrifying displays of power. I couldn't take the psychological warfare for another 3 months. The tension was snapping my sanity piece by piece. The 6-month mark didn't matter anymore. If I stayed in this house any longer, the fear would kill me before his thugs ever got the chance. I had to end it. Tonight, under the cover of the storm, I would demand the divorce. I would give him everything he wanted before he even had to ask, and I would beg for my life. The tires of the Maybach hissed against the wet asphalt as we pulled into the long, winding driveway of the Gu estate. Outside, the sky had fully split open. The rain wasn't falling in drops, it was coming down in sheets, heavy and relentless, blurring the manicured hedges and the stone fountains into a gray, ghostly smudge. I sat curled up against the passenger door, my fingers laced so tightly together that my nails left deep, crescent-shaped indentations in my palms. Every flash of lightning illuminated the interior of the car, casting sharp, jagged shadows across Gu Yanzhou's face. He was staring straight ahead, his hands gripping the steering wheel at the exact 10-2 position, his knuckles white against the dark leather. He hadn't said a single word since we left the ballroom. The heavy, suffocating silence inside the car felt like the atmospheric pressure before a devastating earthquake. He's deciding, I thought, my mind spinning into a dark, frantic spiral of paranoia. He's realizing that I'm becoming a liability. I shouted at him in public. I rejected him in front of the city's elite. The perfect, compliant, invisible wife broke character, and a man like Gu Yanzhou cannot tolerate an unpredictable asset. The car crawled to a halt under the grand portico of the villa. Before the chauffeur could even run out with an umbrella, Yanzhou turned off the ignition. Qingran, he began, his voice dropping into that quiet, gravelly register that usually preceded his most cold, executive decisions. I'm tired, I interrupted, my voice sharp, brittle, and completely uncharacteristic of the woman he had married. I'm going up to change. I didn't wait for his permission. I grabbed the handle, pushed the heavy door open, and practically ran into the foyer of the villa. The warmth of the indoor heating hit my face, but it did nothing to thaw the freezing dread pooling in my stomach. I didn't go to the master bedroom. Instead, I hurried down the long, carpeted corridor of the east wing to my private study, a small, auxiliary room that Yanzhou rarely, if ever, entered. It was the only room in this sprawling fortress where I felt I could breathe without his eyes tracking my thoracic expansion. Locking the door behind me with a faint click, I walked over to the antique writing desk near the window. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely manage the key to the bottom drawer. I turned it, the brass mechanism groaning softly, and reached into the dark recess. There it lay. A thick, heavy white envelope. Inside were the divorce papers. I had drafted them myself weeks ago, copying the standard templates I had found online using a burner laptop I bought with cash at a suburban electronics store. I had filled out every section with meticulous care, initialing every page, signing my name in bold, unyielding black ink. I had checked the boxes waiving my right to his properties, his stocks, his family trusts, and his corporate dividends. I was giving up a fortune that could buy a small country. And I was doing it gladly, because a fortune is completely useless to a woman buried 6 feet under the concrete. Tonight, I whispered, holding the crisp paper against my chest, listening to the thunder rattle the glass window panes. It has to be tonight. A soft, hesitant knock sounded at the door. My heart leaped into my throat. I squeezed my eyes shut, my entire body tensing as if a physical blow were about to land. Qingran? Yanzhou's voice came through the thick wood. He sounded strangely muted, devoid of the sharp authority he had carried at the banquet. Auntie Zhou made some ginger tea to help you warm up after the rain. Can I bring it in? Ginger tea. My mind instantly jumped to the worst possible conclusion. An old tactic. A warm beverage to lower the target's defenses. A sedative to make the compliance smoother. Leave it on the table outside, Yanzhou, I called out, trying to keep my voice from cracking. I'll get it when I'm done. A long pause followed. I held my breath, waiting for him to use his master key, waiting for him to demand entry. But the heavy footsteps outside slowly retreated down the hall. I looked down at the envelope. I took a deep, shuddering breath, smoothing down the front of my beige dress. I couldn't live like an animal in a golden cage anymore, waiting for the day the hunter decided to pull the trigger. I grabbed the white envelope, unlocked the door, and walked out into the corridor, marching toward the main study where I knew he would be waiting. The master study was a massive, split-level room lined with thousands of leather-bound books that looked more like a museum than a workspace. A single desk lamp was turned on, casting a pool of warm, golden light across the vast mahogany desk. Gu Yanzhou sat in his high-backed leather chair, but he wasn't working. His laptop was closed. His tablet was dark. He was simply sitting there in the shadows, his hands resting flat on the desk, staring blankly at a silver-framed photograph. I didn't need to get closer to know what it was. It was our wedding photo, taken 4 years ago, a day where I had smiled until my cheeks ached, and he had looked like a man attending a highly tedious corporate press conference. As the door swung open, he lifted his head. The light caught his face, and for a fraction of a second, I thought I saw a tremor in his lower lip. Qingran, he said, standing up immediately. He didn't assume his usual commanding posture. His shoulders were slightly rounded, his arms hanging loose at his sides. You didn't drink the tea. Are you still cold? I didn't answer him. I walked forward, each step feeling like a march toward a firing squad. I stopped exactly 3 feet away from the edge of his desk, ensuring the massive piece of mahogany remained between us like a physical barricade. With a steady, deliberate movement, I extended my hand and slid the white envelope across the polished wood. It glided over the surface, stopping right under the edge of his closed laptop. Let's divorce, Gu Yanzhou. The words were quiet, but in the vast, high-ceilinged room, they sounded like a thunderclap. Yanzhou's gaze dropped down to the white envelope. His entire body went rigidly still, his breath catching in his throat with a sharp, audible hiss. He didn't touch the paper. He stared at it as if it were a venomous snake that had crawled onto his desk. What is this? He asked, his voice dropping into a ragged, hollow whisper. He looked up, his dark eyes wide with a frantic, disoriented look that I had never seen on him before. Qingran, if you're still upset about what Ruabai said at the banquet, I've already handled it. He will be removed from the board by tomorrow morning. He will never set foot in our presence again. I swear to you. I don't care about Guru Abai, I interrupted, my voice rising, losing its meek, submissive edge for the first time in 2 lifetimes. I took a deep breath, the anger finally burning through the thick layers of my fear. I don't care about your company, your board, or your family politics. I've signed everything, Yanzhou. Look at it. I'm waiving alimony. I'm waiving the division of properties. I am leaving this house with exactly what I brought into it, 2 suitcases of clothes and my dignity. You don't have to worry about a messy public legal battle. You don't have to worry about your shares dropping. Just sign it and let me go. Yanzhou took a step around the desk, his hands reaching out toward me instinctively. No. I won't sign it. Qingran, please, look at me. Listen to me. I know I was cold to you in the past. I know I neglected you, that I treated this marriage like an obligation. But I swear to you on my life, I've changed. I want to be a real husband to you. Give me a chance to show you, just one chance. Stop acting, Gu Yanzhou. I shrieked, the sound ripping from the deepest, rawest part of my chest. The sheer volume of my own voice startled me, echoing off the mahogany walls. Tears, hot and furious, finally spilled over my eyelashes, tracking down my pale cheeks. I took 3 rapid steps backward, my hands flying up in front of me, palms facing out, completely defensive. I can't do this anymore. I screamed, my whole body shaking like a leaf in a gale. I can't sleep in this house. I can't eat the food. Every single time you look at me with that fake, gentle expression, my blood runs cold. Every time you bring me those morning glories, I wonder if you're tracking my movements. Every time you peel those stupid prawns, I wonder if you've laced them with something to make me sick. Every time you defend me in public, I wonder what kind of twisted, sadistic corporate trap you're setting to make my ultimate downfall even more agonizing. Yanzhou stopped dead in his tracks. He looked entirely bewildered, his face turning an ash-gray color as he stared at me. Poisoned? Traps? Qingran, what are you talking about? Why on earth would you ever think I would hurt you? I love you. I've been trying to show you that I love you. Because you killed me. The truth finally tore out of me, loud, ugly, and absolute. The entire universe seemed to stop. The only sound left in the world was the violent drumming of the rain against the glass and my own ragged, hysterical breathing. I pointed a trembling, white-knuckled finger straight at his chest. You killed me, Gu Yanzhou. Don't you dare stand there and lie to me with that face. On that rainy night, after the divorce, I was on the roof of that abandoned warehouse. I was cornered, I was bleeding, and I looked up through the rain and I saw your silhouette. I saw your posture. I saw that exact, black silk umbrella you carry everywhere. You stood there in the dark and you watched your hired thugs push me off that roof. I died. I felt the weightlessness, I felt my bones shatter against the pavement, I felt the rain fill my throat until I couldn't breathe. I collapsed onto my knees right there on the hard floor, burying my face in my hands as the phantom pain of my past life death seemed to ripple through my spine all over again. I gave you everything in that life, I sobbed, my voice breaking into pathetic, ragged pieces. I loved you until I had absolutely nothing left of myself. If you wanted the divorce, I gave it to you. Why couldn't you just let me live? Why did you have to destroy me completely? Please. I've signed the papers. Take the money, take the houses, take the reputation. Just let me live this time. I beg you, just let me live. I waited for the coldness. I waited for him to call the security guards, or to drop the act entirely and laugh at my madness. I braced myself for the cynical, corporate response of a man who had been caught but didn't care. Instead, a sound broke through the room that made my sobbing stop instantly. It was a choked, broken, absolutely devastated wail. I peeked through my fingers. To my absolute shock, Gu Yanzhou, the untouchable, merciless titan of the industry, had dropped heavily to his knees right on the floor in front of me. He didn't try to touch me. He didn't try to defend himself with an executive argument. Instead, he bent forward until his forehead was pressed flat against the carpet, adopting the ancient, absolute posture of a man begging for mercy from a god. His broad shoulders were shaking so violently that his cashmere sweater was pulling at the seams. A ragged, agonizing sob tore from his throat, a sound so thick with grief it didn't sound human. It wasn't me, he wept into the floor, his voice completely ruined, soaked in a profound, desperate agony. Qingran, my sweet, foolish, beautiful Qingran, it wasn't me. I sat frozen on the floor, my breath hitched in my throat, staring down at the man groveling at my feet. The sheer absurdity of the image before me wouldn't process in my brain. This was Gu Yanzhou. He didn't bow. He didn't cry. He didn't apologize to anyone, let alone a wife he had spent years ignoring. What are you saying? I whispered, my voice trembling. Slowly, Yanzhou lifted his head. His face was entirely ruined by tears. His eyes were bloodshot, his nose red, and the flawless, untouchable corporate mask he wore every day had been completely obliterated, leaving behind nothing but a raw, bleeding soul. "I didn't kill you," he said, his voice cracking on every syllable as he looked at me with an intensity that felt like a physical fire. "I would rather tear my own heart out with my bare hands than hurt a single hair on your head. Qingran. I died because you died." My heart stopped. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "You, what?" "I was reborn too," he confessed, a fresh wave of tears spilling over his dark eyelashes, tracking through the flour dust that still faintly stained his jawline. "I woke up 6 months ago in our bedroom, screaming your name, thinking I was still holding your cold body in the freezing rain." I stared at him, my mind spinning so fast the room began to blur. He's a regressor? He remembers? "Listen to me, please," Yanzhou begged, his hands hovering inches away from my knees, trembling with an intense restraint, as if he wanted to hold me but was terrified of causing me a single microsecond of fear. On that rainy night in the past life, we had already been divorced for months. I thought you hated me. I thought that by letting you go and giving you a quiet life away from the Gu family, I was protecting you from the corporate warfare my father left behind. I was an idiot. A blind, arrogant idiot. He choked back another sob, his fingers clutching at his own chest. That night, I received a frantic text message from an unknown number saying you had been kidnapped and taken to the old textile warehouse. I went completely mad. I broke every traffic law in the city, driving through the storm like a lunatic. But I was 20 minutes too late. The silhouette, I stammered, my mind flashing back to the black umbrella. The man on the roof. It was Gu Ruabai, Yanzhou hissed, a flicker of that terrifying, murderous rage returning to his eyes, though it wasn't directed at me. The bastard had stolen my spare umbrella from the trunk of my car a week prior. He wore a coat identical to mine. He wanted you dead because he discovered you had found evidence of his embezzlement before our divorce, and he wanted to frame me for your murder so he could take over the Gu Corporation while I was fighting a capital murder charge in court. The phantom sound of the wind in my ears suddenly shifted. The voice that had said a clean break, Mrs. Gu, it hadn't been Yanzhou's voice. It had been pitched higher, more nasal. It had been Ruabai's voice. In my sheer terror, in my deep-seated belief that Yanzhou despised me, my mind had simply filled in the blanks, assuming the master puppet master was my ex-husband. When I climbed those stairs, Yanzhou continued, his voice dropping into a soft, broken whisper, "You were already on the asphalt. I ran down. I held you in the rain for 3 hours until the forensics team forced me away. Your white dress, it was entirely red, Qingran. I lost my mind that night. I didn't care about the company anymore. I spent the next 2 years ruthlessly destroying every single person who had a hand in your death. I ruined Ruabai's father, I sent Ruabai to a prison where he would never see a sliver of daylight, and then I stopped eating. I stopped sleeping. I drank myself into a lethal liver failure in an empty house, holding a photograph of your face." He looked at me, his eyes begging for an ounce of belief. "When I woke up 3 years in the past, I vowed to God that I would use this second life to give you everything. I wanted to shower you with the affection I had starved you of. I bought the morning glories because I remembered you liked them. I peeled the prawns because I wanted to take care of you. I defended you against Ruabai because the mere sight of him near you made my blood turn to fire. I didn't know, oh God, Qingran, I didn't know you remembered too. I didn't know that every single thing I did to show you love was terrifying you." The heavy, metallic armor of fear that I had worn around my chest for 3 months suddenly cracked. A massive, overwhelming rush of relief, confusion, and realization washed over me, so intense that I felt lightheaded. The bizarre behavior. The puppy dog eyes at the dinner table. The chaotic disaster with the flour in the kitchen. The terrifying defense at the banquet. It wasn't the meticulous calculations of a cold-blooded killer. It was the desperate, clumsy, completely unguided attempts of a deeply traumatized man trying to apologize to a ghost. A small, watery sound escaped my lips. I looked at Yanzhou, who was still kneeling on the floor, waiting for my judgment like a criminal on the scaffold. "You." I wiped a hot tear from my cheek, a bizarre, hysterical bubble of laughter rising in my throat. "You really peeled all those prawns because you loved me? Yanzhou, you peeled 30 king prawns. It looked like a warning ritual. I thought you were trying to elevate my cholesterol to trigger a cardiovascular event." Yanzhou blinked, his tear-stained, ruined face freezing in utter, absolute bewilderment. A cardiovascular event? No. I read a marital advice forum on the internet. It said that modern wives appreciate when their husbands perform small acts of service involving seafood preparation. An acts of service forum? I laughed out loud then, the sound bright, unburdened, and entirely genuine, echoing through the high ceilings of the study. The sheer absurdity of the situation, two people who had died tragic, horrific deaths, currently sitting on a luxury rug arguing about seafood advice forums, was too much to bear. And the flowers? Every single day at 7 a.m.? It felt like a countdown, Yanzhou. Like a mafia warning. Yanzhou let out a ragged, breathless laugh that was half sob, leaning his forehead against my knee as his shoulders finally relaxed. I'm an idiot. A certified corporate genius, but a complete, utter failure at being a human being. Yes, you are, I said softly. Slowly, hesitantly, I lifted my hands. For the first time in 2 lifetimes, I didn't feel the urge to run away. I placed my palms gently against his broad shoulders. He flinched slightly at my touch, but then he let out a long, shuddering sigh of pure relief, leaning into the warmth of my hands. But, I whispered, looking down at his messy, flower and tear-stained hair, perhaps we both have a lot of things to relearn about each other. I reached over to the desk, grabbed the white envelope containing the divorce agreement, and with a clean, sharp movement, I ripped the thick paper straight down the middle. Yanzhou lifted his head, his eyes wide with a fragile, beautiful hope. We have exactly 3 months left before the date of our original divorce, I said, a small, mischievous smile breaking through my tears. Let's see if you can manage to be a decent boyfriend before then, President Gu. Because if you smother me with 30 more prawns without asking, I have another copy of these papers hidden in my dressing room. Yanzhou laughed, a real, booming, joyful sound that completely drove the shadows out of the grand room, and pulled me gently into his arms. This time, I didn't freeze. I wrapped my arms around his neck, burying my face into his cashmere sweater, listening to the steady, strong, and beautifully alive beat of his heart. Outside, the storm continued to roar against the glass, but inside, the rain had finally stopped.